Hey there, just a heads up, this episode of the Judo Science Podcast was created with help from AI. Some of the voices you'll hear are synthetic, but the ideas come from real research and real judo.
I want you to imagine preparing for the absolute most physically demanding day of your entire life.
Yeah, that's a tough baseline to start with.
Right. So maybe it's this massive high-stakes presentation that's going to make or break your career, or maybe it's running a marathon. Now, I want you to imagine trying to conquer that monumental task while you have been actively starving yourself.
And severely dehydrating your body.
Exactly. For a solid week straight leading up to it. It sounds like an absolute nightmare, but this is the very real, fully accepted reality for the vast majority of combat sport athletes.
We are pulling back the curtain to explore the extreme and honestly often entirely hidden world of rapid weight loss in combat sports.
Specifically looking through the lens of judo.
Right, judo. And we have a really revealing stack of research to get through today to help us unpack this.
We do. We're looking at a massive 2020 systematic review. That one analyzed 14 different studies covering over 1,100 judo athletes.
Which is a huge sample size for this kind of specific sports science.
Yeah, over 1,100. And we are pairing that with a highly specific 2022 clinical study that tracked the blood, the electrolytes, and the immunity of male college judokas in real time.
Plus a recent literature review that focuses on the practical applications and really the grim physiological reality of weight cutting.
The goal here is simple. We want to separate the long-standing myth of the competitive edge from the hard scientific reality shown in the data. We want to look closely at what actually happens to the human body and the human brain when pushed to these absolute biological extremes.
Because we all know why fighters cut weight. I mean, everyone wants to be the bigger guy on the mat.
Right, physics is physics.
Exactly. But looking at the research compiled by Artioli and his colleagues, the sheer scale of this practice is just staggering. We aren't just talking about shedding a few pounds before a match.
The data shows up to 90% of judokas are doing this. 90%. It's basically the standard.
And they are aiming for massive reductions. The standard goal across these studies is dropping roughly 5% of their total body weight.
And sometimes pushing up to 10%.
Yeah, up to 10% in a highly compressed 5 to 7 day window right before their weigh-ins. And because these athletes are constantly losing and regaining the same weight over and over for different tournaments, the clinical literature refers to them as weight cyclers.
Weight cyclers. I want to walk through what that 5 to 7 day window actually looks like for you listening, because we should track a hypothetical fighter going through this process.
Let's do it.
So let's say it's Monday and the weigh-ins are on Saturday. To hit that 10% drop, they aren't just, skipping dessert or eating a little less. The methods detailed in the research sound more like medieval torture.
They really do.
They are severely restricting their fluids. They are slashing their calories to the absolute bone.
The literature notes they're often running a deficit of 500 kilocalories a day.
Which is wild.
It is a massive energy drop for an elite athlete who is, remember, still training full-time.
Yeah, the training doesn't stop just because they're starving. While they are depleted and dehydrated, they are actively increasing their physical exertion.
Right, to force the sweat out.
They're training in heavy, unbreathable rubber suits. They're sitting in boiling saunas for hours. They use laxatives. And this was one of the most visceral details from the research. They will carry around an empty bottle and repeatedly spit into it all day.
Just to expel every single possible ounce of water from their salivary glands.
It's insane. It is an all-out assault on the body's homeostasis. I mean, I know what I'm like when I'm delayed for lunch by an hour. I become an absolute monster.
We all do.
So multiplying that feeling by 6 days of intense physical labor, no food, and literally no water, it's hard to even fathom doing a single push-up in that state, let alone stepping onto a mat to fight another highly trained martial artist.
But that brings us to a really fascinating physical paradox in the data. You hear that list of brutal methods, and the logical assumption is that an athlete's physical performance would completely crash.
Right. How could you possibly fight at an elite level after starving yourself and spitting into a bottle for a week?
Exactly. But the 2020 systematic review reveals something incredibly counterintuitive.
Wait, so if they're that depleted, how are they still functioning at all?
Well, the researchers looked at specific performance metrics. They tested hand grip strength, they tested squat jumps, counter-movement jumps, and 30-second explosive jumping tests.
And what did they find?
In many of these studies, the athlete's strength and power remained largely unchanged, or it only decreased slightly.
That makes no sense.
It gets weirder. In some reaction time tests, the athletes who underwent rapid weight loss actually improved. They got faster.
They got faster while starving and dehydrated. How is that biologically possible?
Think of it like the body running a biological credit card.
Okay.
It is maxing out tomorrow's health to buy 5 minutes of explosive power today. The human body is incredibly resilient and masterful at compensating for short bursts of highly specific intense movement.
And a judo match is typically only about 5 minutes long.
Exactly. The body can trigger an acute stress response, basically a massive adrenaline dump to facilitate the specific number of throws and grapples needed for that very short duration.
So they're basically masking the extreme fatigue with pure panic and adrenaline?
Precisely that. The performance on the outside might look stable on a squat jump test, but the internal engine is redlining. It's doing this at a massive, hidden internal cost.
Okay, let's look at that internal cost, starting with the cardiovascular system. Because when you lose that much water through sweat and fluid restriction, you reduce your blood plasma volume. Your blood literally gets thicker.
Yes, the scientific term is increased viscosity.
Increased viscosity, blood sludge.
Basically, yeah. So when your blood volume drops because you are severely dehydrated, and that remaining blood becomes thick and viscous, your stroke volume plummets. But your muscles are still screaming for oxygen to execute those complex judo throws.
Because they're fighting for their lives on the mat.
Exactly. So to get the same amount of oxygen to the limbs using tiny squirts of thick blood, your heart has to beat significantly faster. It goes into absolute overdrive.
The numbers on this are terrifying. When researchers actually hooked these athletes up to monitors during a simulated judo match following a weight cut, the athletes' average heart rates hovered around 174 beats per minute.
And spiked up to 187 beats per minute.
187.
For these athletes, hitting 187 beats per minute means operating at 92 to 99% of their theoretical maximum heart rate.
They are maxing out their heart's absolute physical limit just to survive the 5-minute match. And that's before you even factor in the sheer muscular exertion of picking up a 200-pound opponent and throwing them over your hip.
Right. If the heart is working that hard just to keep the lights on, we have to look deeper at what else is breaking down inside the body. Which brings us to the 2022 clinical study by Jung.
This study is incredibly valuable because it tracked 14 male college judo athletes in real time, pulling blood samples throughout the entire rapid weight loss process.
And they divided these athletes into 2 distinct groups. They had 7 ordinary athletes, meaning guys who only competed at the regional level, and 7 excellent athletes who competed at higher elite tiers.
And they put all 14 of them through a 6 to 7% body weight cut over 6 days. But they weren't just resting in a sauna for 6 days.
No, this included 120 minutes of daily induction technique training.
And we need to give some context on what induction technique training is.
That is 2 straight hours of relentless, repetitive drilling. They are gripping, lifting, and throwing a resisting opponent, taking heavy falls onto the mat over and over again.
All while actively starving and dehydrated.
Correct. So they took blood samples before the cut started on Monday, then 6 days into the cut on Saturday, then immediately after a grueling 5-minute match, and finally 30 minutes into their recovery.
So what did that blood work actually show us about what our hypothetical fighter is experiencing on the inside?
It paints a very clear picture of metabolic starvation. Because these athletes are cutting calories so drastically, their glycogen stores are completely depleted.
Glycogen being the carbohydrate stored in your muscles and liver.
Yes, it's your body's preferred, easily accessible rocket fuel. When that glycogen is gone, the body enters a harsh survival state. It literally starts eating its own fat stores just to keep the organs running.
The researchers saw this transition clearly in the blood work through massive spikes in specific biomarkers, right? Triglycerides and free fatty acids.
Exactly. The body is scrambling for alternative energy sources, dumping these fats into the bloodstream to burn them. But it's a very dirty, inefficient fuel compared to glycogen, especially for explosive athletic movements like judo.
This starvation state also completely throws the body's electrical system into chaos. The 2022 study showed that calcium levels in the blood dropped significantly while magnesium levels rose.
Now, we hear the word electrolytes all the time in sports drink commercials.
Right, gotta get your electrolytes.
But out on the mat, That specific shift between calcium and magnesium is critical.
Why does that matter to a fighter?
Calcium acts as the spark plug for your muscles to contract. When your brain tells your arm to pull the opponent, calcium is the chemical messenger that makes the muscle fibers physically fire.
Okay.
But as severe dehydration sets in, magnesium floods the system and essentially blocks that calcium.
So your brain is screaming at your arms to throw the opponent, but the spark plugs are literally flooded.
It actively impairs neuromuscular efficiency. The signal is sent from the brain, but the muscles physically cannot respond with the required speed or force.
That's terrifying. But honestly, the most alarming part of this 2022 study wasn't just the fat-burning survival state or the flooded spark plugs. It was the immune system freakout. They measured specific immunoglobulins. These are the frontline soldiers of your immune system that fight off respiratory and mucosal infections, right? Things like IgA, IgG, IgM.
And the researchers found a violent roller coaster in those immune markers. During the extreme weight loss period and immediately after the fight, those immunoglobulins wildly spiked.
Now, a spike doesn't mean they suddenly have a superpowered immune system, though, does it?
No, not at all. It's actually a sign of severe acute physiological stress. The body's defense mechanisms are sounding a massive alarm because they perceive the severe dehydration and starvation as a critical threat to survival.
But that alarm doesn't last, because just 30 minutes into the recovery period after the match, those immune markers completely crashed.
They plummeted well below baseline.
And the researchers did note a slight difference between the ordinary and the excellent athletes here, right?
They did. The excellent athletes managed to preserve their lean muscle mass slightly better during the 6-day cut than the ordinary athletes did. However, when it came to the immune system, the shock was universal.
So both the elite and the regional guys suffered that same wild spike and subsequent crash?
Exactly. If a fighter is doing this multiple times a year, constantly weight cycling, they are severely suppressing their immune function every single time.
Long-term, they're leaving themselves highly susceptible to chronic illness and constant infections.
And if the blood in the muscles are failing and the immune system is crashing, you have to imagine the brain is screaming at the athlete to stop. The psychological impact of fighting your own biology is profound.
Let's talk about that mental toll, because the sources look closely at this using the POMS survey, the Profile of Mood States questionnaire. This was used across several of the studies to measure psychological well-being.
Right.
And going back to my point earlier about being hangry, you know that irrational anger you get when your blood sugar drops? Multiplying that by 6 days of no water yields some pretty extreme data.
The psychological data is actually some of the most consistent evidence across all the literature we reviewed. While the physical performance metrics were occasionally mixed due to those adrenaline dumps we talked about, the psychological impact was universally negative.
The POMS data showed significant measurable spikes in feelings of tension, anger, fatigue, and confusion among the athletes who lost weight rapidly.
And at the exact same time that their anger and confusion are skyrocketing, their vigor absolutely plummets.
And the survey defines vigor as their feeling of physical energy, readiness, and enthusiasm.
Exactly. Interestingly, the markers for clinical depression generally remained unchanged, but the acute mood states related to focus and tactical execution were severely compromised.
So our hypothetical fighter is stepping onto the mat feeling tense, irrationally angry, totally exhausted, and highly confused with zero actual vigor.
It's a terrible combination.
In a sport like judo, where a single misstep or a slightly delayed reaction to an opponent's foot sweep ends the match instantly, confusion seems like the worst possible state to be in.
It creates a massive barrier before the referee even starts the match. Because of the severe dehydration, the athlete's perceived rate of exertion goes through the roof.
Meaning everything feels heavier.
This means that every single movement feels infinitely harder than it actually is. They are trying to make complex, split-second tactical decisions while their brain is fighting a biochemical crisis, constantly screaming at them that they are out of water and completely out of fuel.
Which brings up the ultimate question, really the dark side of this entire culture. Is this perceived advantage of stepping onto the mat slightly heavier than your opponent actually worth the cost?
When you look at the research, it cites some truly grim realities that go far beyond just diminished vigor or losing a judo match.
The human cost can be absolute. The literature brings up the tragedy of 3 NCAA collegiate wrestlers who died of hyperthermia while attempting to cut weight before a competition.
And they were trying to cut roughly 15% of their body weight.
Which is, losing 15% isn't just a tough cut. It is clinical, life-threatening dehydration. Hyperthermia means their bodies literally lost the physical ability to cool themselves down.
Because there was no water left in their systems to produce sweat. Their core temperatures spiked, their organs overheated, and their bodies completely shut down.
It's heartbreaking, and it highlights how deeply entrenched and normalized this culture is at every single level of the sport. The research cites a horrifying case of a 5-year-old boy being actively pressured into rapid weight loss practices just to compete in a local tournament.
5-year-old?
Starving and dehydrating himself to manipulate a scale, it's really hard to hear. But even if an athlete avoids a catastrophic outcome like hyperthermia, the physical danger on the mat itself is incredibly high.
The risk of severe career-altering injury goes way up. Research shows that losing just 5% of your body mass drastically alters your metabolism and your muscle contraction patterns.
We talked about those flow with spark plugs.
Right. When your muscles aren't firing correctly to brace for an impact, and your joints aren't properly supported because the surrounding tissues are completely dehydrated, you become highly prone to catastrophic injuries.
Like ligament tears, blown out knees, joint dislocations.
Exactly. It's gotten to the point where scientists are actively stepping in and demanding change. The literature review highlights that researchers, notably Artioli back in 2016, are calling for a complete and total ban on rapid weight loss in combat sports.
They are arguing that the risks to human health are simply too high, and that the practice fundamentally undermines the fairness and integrity of the sport itself.
But the research doesn't just point out the massive problems. It offers very clear, science-backed alternatives for the future of the sport. If athletes still need to manage their weight to compete in specific classes, the literature lays out a safer path forward.
What does that look like?
First, the weight loss must be gradual. We're talking about dropping roughly 1 kilogram or about 2.2 pounds per week.
So a slow burn rather than dropping 10 pounds of water in 5 days.
Second, athletes absolutely must maintain their carbohydrate intake during the weight reduction phase.
To keep the glycogen levels up.
Exactly. This ensures those vital glycogen stores in the muscles and liver remain full, preventing the body from entering that metabolic starvation mode where it eats its own fat and spikes triglycerides.
Right.
Third, emerging evidence suggests that using structured intermittent fasting can promote healthy, gradual fat loss while preserving that crucial lean muscle mass.
But those are just training suggestions for the athletes. How do you actually enforce a cultural shift like that? Because as long as the perceived advantage of being heavier exists, fighters are going to try to exploit it.
That's where systemic, top-down rule changes come in. The most critical solution proposed in the literature is the implementation of mandatory hydration tests at the weigh-ins.
How does that actually work in practice?
It usually involves testing the specific gravity of an athlete's urine.
Specific gravity.
Specific gravity essentially measures how concentrated the particles and waste products in your urine are. If your urine is highly concentrated, it proves you are clinically dehydrated. Under this proposed system, an athlete steps on the scale, and maybe they make the weight limit perfectly. But if they fail that urine-specific gravity test, the medical staff rules them dangerously dehydrated, and they physically cannot compete.
So you completely remove the incentive to dehydrate. If you drain your body of water to make the weight, you fail the medical test and you don't get to fight anyway.
It forces every single athlete to compete closer to their natural walking weight. It changes the entire meta of the sport from weight manipulation back to actual martial arts technique.
It would completely change the landscape.
Next time on the Judo Science Podcast, episode 41, Beyond the Weigh-In, the real cost of rapid weight loss for judo athletes.